Hey guys, this is Mark at Sound Theory Studio, and today I want to do a lesson on music theory. And this is a subject that is feared by many, and it really doesn't need to be. I just want to start with just telling you why you should learn music theory, kind of get you pumped up for the task ahead, because it is quite a bit of work. It's not easy, and there's a lot of memorization, there's a lot of study to be done, but it is certainly something that anyone can understand if they just have the patience and the drive to do it. And I hope that you will, because it is really worth it. It really pays off big time. I can just tell you that for many years I played guitar before I learned music theory, and I remember the day that I really started studying music theory, my playing took off in an upward direction after that. And you wouldn't think that studying music theory, which is something that doesn't even involve holding the guitar, would affect your playing so much, if at all, but it does. And the reason is because when you understand music and when you understand what notes harmonize well with chords and keys and things like that, you can play with confidence knowing that everything you're doing is going to sound good, even if you've never even tried it before, because you understand the music, you understand what key it's in, you understand what scales work with these chords, etc. And you can just start improvising right off the top of your head and know that it's going to sound great. And that is a powerful thing. One story I tell my students a lot is that I remember when I first started playing guitar, from time to time I would meet people that were really good, and I'd see them just improvise a guitar solo over just someone jamming. Like someone would just start playing some chords, and this person would step in and just start playing out of nowhere, having never really heard this chord progression before. And that was always just sorcery to me. Like, how are they doing that? That's incredible. Like, I think I assumed it was something about their ear. Like, they could just hear what was going to sound good, and then they would play it. And that may be the case for some people, but I think it's more that they understood music theory, they understood the chord progression, what key it was in, and they were able to instantly start playing, start doing some sort of improvisation solo, write a solo if they wanted to, etc., and make it sound really good. So that's the key. That is where knowledge is power in guitar, and all instruments for that matter, because music theory applies to all instruments. And with that said, let me make another quick point, which is that learning music theory is worth your time, not just as a guitarist, but just as a musician. And a great example of that is I recently started learning to play piano. Now, I've never played piano in my life, ever, and just not at all. And at first I thought, well, this is going to be a long journey. It took me so many years to get any good at guitar. You know, it's going to be many, many more years to get any good at piano. Is this something I really want to take on right now? It's such a huge commitment. And that's all true. But what I realized, having played another instrument other than guitar really for the first time ever, was that my knowledge of music theory made the whole thing a pretty easy transition. It's still going to take years for me to get really good at piano, but as soon as I sat down, I realized all the white keys are, there's no sharps or flats. The sharps and flats are in the black keys, etc. I understood the entire layout of the keyboard just from my music theory knowledge, even though I'd never played piano before. So music theory applies to all instruments, and if you ever decide to learn more than one instrument, or even if you don't, it's just amazing knowledge to have. All musicians should know something about music theory. One more point I'll make before we get started is a lot of people that I've met will say something to this effect or some variation. It'll be, oh, so-and-so doesn't know music theory and he or she is an amazing guitar player, so I don't need to learn it either. Okay, that's probably true in some cases, and I can think of a guitarist or two that are famous that say that they don't know any music theory or very little, and they are amazing guitarists. And what I would say to that is that would be like someone saying, this person is an amazing poet, but they never studied the language. So I don't need to study the language either if I want to be an amazing poet. That doesn't make any sense. There probably are people who are good poets that have never studied their language, but all they're doing is making it so much more difficult and so much harder on themselves. Study the language, you're going to be a much better poet. Study music, you're going to be a better musician. And just because there's this very, very, very small group of people that have been successful on the instrument without understanding their music theory doesn't mean that you should throw it out the window and not learn it yourself. you're only going to make it harder on yourself, and it's limiting. And why would you want to limit yourself? It doesn't make any sense. And the other thing I'll say about that real quick is even the people who have become successful at guitar without knowing music theory, they are using music theory whether they know it or not. You know, when someone who doesn't know theory writes a solo and performs it, they're playing scales, they're playing notes that harmonize well with the chords, they're playing within the key of the song. They are exercising music theory whether they know it or not. So why not do yourself a favor and just know it, and then you can avoid all that. And you avoid all the trouble, and you can avoid all the confusion, and you can just understand it from the get-go. So anyway, that's my little speech about why you should learn music theory. Hopefully you're convinced. But let's go ahead and move on. Now, this is going to be a multi-part video because it's an enormous topic, and I can't cover all of it. You know, I'm just going to give you basically, the basics, but some advanced stuff too, because I want to take you pretty far with this. And what's going to happen is you're going to start by learning the notes, just what all the notes are. Then we're going to move to building your major scales. Then we're going to move to building chords. Then we're going to move to the modes and building other scales, etc. And this knowledge is going to allow you to understand a lot of what you hear and what you're playing. And that's powerful, right? I mean, that's what you want. You don't want to just play the guitar and have it be like this magical instrument that just sounds good and you don't really understand why. And this note works great on that chord, and you have no idea why. It just does, and you're content with that. You don't want to do that if you want to be a great guitarist or a great musician on any instrument. You want to understand what you're doing. You want to understand why. At least that's how I feel about it. And all the hard work certainly paid off for me, and I'm sure it will for you too. So let's go ahead and get started. After we go through the scales and chords and all that, we're eventually going to learn how to identify the keys of a song. And once you know the key of a song, then you can analyze it, know what scales sound good over it, improvise a solo, and become a wizard like those people that I saw when I was first learning guitar that I thought they were magic, that they could just make up a solo. Well, you'll be able to do that too if you have the knowledge to make it happen. So let's get started. We're going to go to the board here, take you back to school, and let's get this going. All right, see you in a minute. Okay, now that we've talked a little bit about why you should learn music theory, let's go ahead and jump right in and get started. So the first thing we should talk about is the notes. So the notes are the building blocks of music. If you've ever played an instrument at all, and even if you haven't, you've almost certainly heard of notes. Pretty much everyone knows what a note is. So notes are the building blocks of music, and you should think of notes as being, the building blocks of music is the best way to put it. Notes are used to form scales and chords and chord progressions and just songs and everything. It's all based on notes. So with that said, let's go ahead and write out all the possible notes that there are in music as we know it. So we'll start with A. And notes are used, we use letters to show notes in music. And the letters range from A to G. And you probably know that as well. But in case you don't, there's no such thing as an H note or an I note or an M note. It's all just A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. It's just those letters. So with that said, let's continue. So A to A sharp or B flat. Now we'll talk more about this here in a second. But first off, just know that A sharp and B flat are the same note. They're enharmonic is the term we use. It means that it is the same note. It's just two different names for the same note. So let me go and finish writing all the notes, and then we'll talk a bit about that. So right after A sharp or B flat, it goes to B. Then it goes straight to C. Now this is the first thing I want you to memorize, is that between B and C, there aren't any notes. It just goes straight from B to C. So that's going to be the first one. It's going to happen again here in a minute. So continuing, C sharp or D flat. Okay. Then we go to D. Then we go to D sharp or E flat. Then to E. Then straight to F. Okay? So that's where it happens again. Between B and C, there's nothing. Between E and F, there's nothing. Then to F sharp. or G flat, then to G, then to G sharp, or A flat, and then that continues back to A. All right, so there's all the possible notes. Now let's talk for a minute about these guys here, A sharp and B flat. They're the same note, two different names for the same note. C sharp and D flat, same deal, same note, just two different labels for the same thing. So the first question you probably have is, if they're the same thing, why are there even two different names for it? Why not just call it A sharp and be done with it instead of A sharp or B flat? Well, there is a good reason for this. Think of it like a language. You've got to think of music like a language because it really is. Take the English language. How many ways are there to say money? Okay, there's money, cash, currency, and then there's slang terms like, you know, I don't know, C notes and Benjamins and greens. I mean, there's like so many ways to say money in our language, it's ridiculous, which is probably doesn't say something very good about us, but regardless. But that's just in the English language. Then think of all the ways there are to say money throughout the world using different languages. So, you know, in Mexico, they would say dinero. So many, many, many ways out there to say money, but they all mean the same thing, okay? So then the other thing to realize about that is they all mean the same thing, but there's going to be certain times and certain occasions where you would use one term instead of the other. So for instance, if you're in the heart of Mexico in some small town where no one speaks English maybe, you'd be wise to say dinero, right? But you're not going to go and start talking about money and cash because they may not understand you. Go to some little tiny town in the Midwest where, you know, everyone speaks English, and if you start saying dinero, people might be confused. You need to say money or cash. So it's all about the situation. It's all about, you know, saying the appropriate term depending on the situation. And that's exactly how A sharp and B flat work, where depending on the situation, you're going to call it one or the other. And during this lesson, we will get to why you would call it one or the other. So just think of it like a language. Okay, so now that we've got all the possible notes written on the board, let's build your first scale. Now, the first scale that pretty much everyone learns is the major scale, and more specifically, the C major scale. So let's start with that. Now, the first thing we need to do, though, is let's put on here the formula for building a major scale, okay? So the formula is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay, so you might be asking, what does that even mean? So let's define these. A whole step equals a distance of 2 frets on the guitar, or you can think of it as 2 positions on the diagram above. Now let's define a half step, and then I'll show you some examples of what this means, and it'll make sense. So next up is a half step, and a half step is just going to be exactly what it says. It's going to be half of what the whole step is. So we're talking now a distance of 1 fret on the guitar and 1 position on the above diagram. There we go. Okay, so with that said, let's do a couple examples. So what is a half step above B? Well, a half step equals 1 position or 1 fret. Forgot to write fret there. There we go. Okay, so a half step above B is 1 position, so you just go 1 to the right, C. So when I say above, I mean to the right and ascending in pitch. That's what above means. So 1 half step above B, you just go 1 over at C. Now let's do another one. Let's do a whole step above A. So here's A. A whole step equals 2 positions or 2 frets on the guitar. So 1, 2. So a whole step above A is B. All right. So pretty straightforward, really. Let's look at one more. Let's look at what's a whole step above B. So here's B. There's 1. There's 2. It's either going to be C sharp or D flat, right? So now we need to talk about when would you call it one, when would you call it the other. But that so far, just know that a whole step is 2 positions on the diagram, a half step is 1 position. If you're looking down at your guitar, or any instrument you play, really, but specifically on the guitar, a distance of 1 fret is a half step, and a distance of 2 frets is a whole step. So if you play an A note on your guitar, which is fret 5 on string 6, and you say, what is a half step above this note? You just move your finger up 1 fret, and you get an A sharp. So there's A, 1 fret, 1 position, A sharp, or B flat. So, all right, very good. So now that we know the formula, let's go ahead and build your first scale, which will be the C major scale. Okay, so how you do it is you'd start with C, and then you insert the formula. All right, so C, whole step. So what's a whole step above C? So C, whole step equals 2 positions. So 1, 2, C to D. Okay, now starting from D, we need another whole step. So D, 1, 2 takes you to E. Okay, now we're at the half step in the formula. So we need 1 fret or 1 position higher. So here's E. Easy enough, we just go 1 up, you get to F. Okay, now we're back to a whole step. So a whole step above F, here's F. 1, 2, you get G. Okay, at G we need another whole step. So here's G. 1, 2, we go back to the beginning, you get A. Okay, another whole step above A. 1, 2, you get B. And then last but not least is that half step. Put a half step above B is 1 position, 1. You just go from B to C. All right, so you may have heard before, you may not have, but the key of C major has no flats and no sharps. And if you've heard that before, now you know why. Because when you start with C and then insert this formula, you just don't land on any flats or sharps. You just land on the natural letters, okay? So now let's look at a different key and see what happens. So let's look at the key of G. Okay, so we're starting on G. Write the letter G and then start inserting the formula after you write it. So G, now a whole step, 1, 2 positions takes you back to the beginning, so you get A. Okay, I need another whole step, A, 1, 2 to B. Okay, now we need a half step, so B, half step is 1 position, B to C. Okay, all right, now another whole step above C, 1, 2, brings you to D. Another whole step above D, 1, 2, takes you to E. Okay, here's where things get interesting. So we still need a whole, we're right here on the formula. We need another whole step. So what's a whole step above E? So you take 2 positions, 1, 2. Okay, it's either going to be F sharp or G flat. Now you got to ask yourself, what do you name it? Okay, now here's where the rules come in. Now I want you to think of these rules. Again, this is a lot like a language. Think of the rules as being like grammar rules when you speak English, like what you learned as a child when you were learning your English in your English classes. So one of the rules are these always need to be in alphabetical order. And if you look at what we have so far, you can see that. So we started with G. There are no letters after G, so it goes back to the beginning to A, and then B, C, D, E, going in alphabetical order, and so on. And the key of C major was the same way. They're always going to be in alphabetical order like that. Now, or in other words, whatever letter you start on, it's always going to go this way until you reach the end, come back, and continue going that way over and over. So think of it in that order as well. So that's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is there's always going to be one of each letter, and there's not going to be more than one variation of each letter. So what I mean by that is you're never going to see A and A sharp in the same scale. Okay, not the major scale. So you're not going to see D and D flat because that would be 2 variations of the same letter. You're only going to have one variation of each letter. So with those 2 rules said, and listen to that a couple more times if you really need it to sink in, what would we choose here between F sharp and G flat? Well, the answer is F sharp. But let's go ahead and write G flat. Let's put the wrong answer here first and just take a look at why it's not right. So G, start over at A, B, C, D, E, G. We skipped F completely. It's not in alphabetical order anymore. So that would be one reason why. The other reason why is rule number 2, which says there's not going to be more than one variation of each letter. And right now there is. There's a G and there's a G flat. So that breaks both of the rules. That's no good. Let's change it to F sharp and see what happens. So F sharp. There we go. All right, now let's see. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay, so alphabetical order is good. We're not skipping any letters. We don't have two variations of the same letter. We're good. So that's the answer, and that is the answer to why you would choose one or the other on each of these as you build these scales. In the key of G, this happens to be an F sharp. In other keys, it might end up being a G flat. It's always going to depend on when you build these on following the rules. Whichever one satisfies the rules is the one you choose. So now let's finish this off. We're at the last step, which is the half step. So a half step above F sharp just takes you back to G. So we begin on G, we end on G. It was the same on the C major scale. We begin and end on C. And you're going to see that on all of these major scales, beginning and ending on the same letter. All right, very good. Let's look at one more. And this time, if this is making sense to you, as I'm doing this, kind of name out loud or in your head each note as I go and see if you can get it before I get it. So let's start with let's do the key of D this time. Okay. So we start with D, then insert the formula. What's a whole step above D? Hopefully you're saying it out loud at this point. Whole step above D is E, because a whole step equals 2 positions. Here's D, 1, 2, land on E. Okay, now we need another whole step. What's a whole step above E? Okay, 1, 2. It's either F sharp or G flat. Which is it going to be to satisfy the rule of alphabetical order? So it has to be F sharp, right? D, E, F. If I put G flat, we'd have skipped the F completely and it wouldn't be in alphabetical order anymore. All right, so we got D, E, F sharp. Now we're at the half step. So what's a half step above F sharp? There's F sharp. Half step equals 1 position, so you just go to G. Okay. Now we need a whole step. So here's G, 1, 2, takes us back to the beginning. We get A. Okay, another whole step from A, 1, 2, you get B. Okay, here's another one we have to figure out. So we need another whole step from B. Here's B, 1, 2. You either get C sharp or D flat. Which is it going to be? Which one satisfies the rules? Which one keeps things in alphabetical order? So it has to be C sharp, right? There we go. Okay. Now this brings up rule number 3, which just kind of solidifies the other 2 rules as well. In these major scales, you'll have a key like C major, which has no flats and no sharps. And then you'll have a key like this one that has sharps in it. And you'll find other keys have flats in them, but you're never going to see a major scale key that has flats and sharps in it. That's not how they're built. They're not going to mix together. So think of that as rule number 3, and that just solidifies this pattern we're forming even more. Okay, so let's keep going. So we're at the last step, right, which is a half step. We're at C sharp. A half step above C sharp is D. Just move forward 1 position there from C sharp to D. There we go. Begins and ends on D. There's the key of D major. All right. Let's look at one where something a little different happens. Let's look at the key of F. Okay, so you start by writing the F, and then you insert the formula. So F, whole step to G. Okay, and then another whole step. So here was the F, 1, 2 to G. Another whole step, 1, 2, back to A. Okay, now a half step. So here's where it changes a little bit. So we're at A. What's a half step above A? Well, it'll just be 1 position over, which is A sharp or B flat. So now what you're going to want to do is ask yourself, which is it which satisfies the rules? Well, this time around, it's not the sharp one, right? Because the sharp one would be A sharp, you'd end up having two variations of A, not alphabetical order anymore. That's no good. So we're going to put B flat to make it work. There you go. So this is considered a flat key because you have to use a flat note this time around to make the formula work and the rules work. All right. So now we got B flat. Let's do another whole step. 1, 2 to C. And another whole step. 1, 2 to D. Okay. Another whole step. 1, 2 to E. And finish it off with that last part, the half step, which is E to F. All right, very good. So there's the key of F, which happens to be a flat key. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop here just for a moment, and I want to just outline to you what I'd like for you to memorize and start working on. First things first, you need to be able to write this diagram on your own and just be able to visualize it in your head. So take a look at it, try to memorize it, and then get out a piece of paper and write it yourself over and over if you have to until you can remember A sharp or B flat, B, straight to C, C sharp, D flat, D, D sharp, E flat, E, straight to F, F sharp, G flat, G, G sharp, A flat, back to the beginning. Be able to write that on your own and make sure you have it memorized completely. The next thing you need to memorize is just don't forget between B and C there's nothing, and between E and F there's nothing. So that's going to be very important to remember because you're going to use that all the time. B, C, E, F, no notes are in between them. All right. After you get that memorized, the next thing you need to work on is memorize this formula. You're going to use it a million times. You need to have it locked in your brain. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Get that memorized. You're going to be using it a lot. Also, understand what these symbols mean. Whole step equals 2 frets on the guitar or 2 positions. Half step equals 1 fret on the guitar or 1 position. So this is a measure of distance if you think about it. This is a distance of 2 frets. A whole step above 1 fret is 2 frets away from it. It's a measure of distance. Half step is 1 fret away, 1 fret distance. And on the diagram, it's also talking about distance because 2 positions, 1, 2, we're talking about a distance of 2 positions and 1 for the half step. So make sure you've got all that down and memorized and it all makes sense to you. And you might need to watch this video 2 or 3 times for all of that to really sink in. And if so, that's fine. You know, some people get this right away and think it's pretty straightforward. Other people, you know, really need to look at it for a while. And I mean, I've had some students that, you know, it took several sessions of going through this before it really clicked what it all meant and how it worked. So if you have to go through this a few times, that's not a problem at all. Now let's look at, before I give you your final assignment for this lesson, let's look at one key where this gets strange. And there's actually 4 of them, but let's look at one of them to start. So let's look at the key of F sharp. All right. So starting with F sharp, whole step, 1, 2 to G sharp. Okay. And then from G sharp, a whole step, 1 takes us back to A, 2, A sharp or B flat. It's got to be A sharp, right? Otherwise, we would have, if we did B flat there, we'd be mixing flats and sharps and we would have skipped the A. All right. Now a half step from A sharp to B. A whole step, 1, 2, either C sharp or D flat. It has to be C sharp. Okay, a whole step from that, 1, 2, we get D sharp. Okay, here's where it gets interesting. We need another whole step, right? So, what's a whole step above D sharp? Okay, a whole step above D sharp would be 1, 2. It would be F. Well, the correct answer is F, but that breaks the rules, right? Because if I put an F here, we've skipped E and we're no longer in alphabetical order. So this is one of the keys where it gets strange and it's hard to make the rules work. So here's what you do to fix it and make it work. And it seems really strange at first, and a lot of people raise an eyebrow when they see this for the first time. But over time it makes sense, and you get used to it. So the correct answer is F. A whole step above D sharp, 1, 2 is F. But we can't call it F because that breaks the rules. So temporarily, just for this key, let's rename F to E sharp. Okay. So we're going to call F E sharp. Now, if you think about it, there's no notes in between E and F. It goes straight from E to F. So if you call a note E sharp, you're saying E sharp. It's the same thing as F. E sharp is F. It's just a different label for the same thing, going back to what we talked about with language. So if you call F E sharp, it works. We're back to alphabetical order. Everything worked. So it's a little weird. Think about this as it's communication between musicians is what this is all about. And you definitely want to learn it this way, even though it seems odd, because when you speak with other musicians that know their music theory, they communicate in this way. And it keeps everything uniform between all the keys to rename it that way. Like I said, it seems strange at first, but you get used to it. It does start to seem logical after a while. It starts to make sense. So just roll with it. Trust me. Trust me on this one. All right, so we're going to call F E sharp to make this work. Now we need to finish off the scale. The last one is a half step. So what's a half step above E sharp? Well, remember E sharp is F. They're the same note, right? Just two different names. What's a half step above this? 1. F sharp or G flat. What's it going to be? Has to be F sharp. And there you go. We finished it off. Begins and ends with F sharp. All right? So that's a weird one, and there's 2 or 3 more just like it. Most of them work out just fine. They're really easy, but you get a few weird ones like this where you have to rename a note like that to make it work. Okay, let's look at another one like that. Let's look at the key of G flat. Okay. So G flat is right here. So start to insert the formula. Whole step above G flat is A flat. Whole step above A flat, 1, 2 is B flat. Okay. Now what's a half step above B flat? So it's going to get weird again, right? Because here's B flat, half step above B flat, 1 position over is B. Well, that would be G flat, A flat, B. Breaks the rules, right? You'd have 2 variations of the same letter, not in alphabetical order anymore, etc. So we need to rename that B so that it makes sense. So what would you call it? Well, it needs to be G, A, B, C. It needs to be some form of C here to keep the alphabetical order going. So we're going to call B C flat. Just like we called the F E sharp to make that scale work, we're going to call B C flat in this scale to make this one work. There you go. Strange, yes, but makes sense and works. All right, so let's move on. So we got whole, half. We're up to a whole step now. So it's a whole step above C flat. Don't forget that C flat is B. So we're here, 1, 2. It's either C sharp or D flat. Has to be D flat to follow the rules. Okay, another whole step, 1, 2 to E flat. Okay, another whole step, 1, 2 to F. And then last but not least, what's a half step above F? Here's F. 1 position over is F sharp or G flat. It's going to be G flat. Begins and ends on G flat. We're good to go. There's the key of G flat major. So to reiterate again, these are all major scales. There's no minor scales in this yet or anything like that. These are all different keys of the major scale. So this is G flat major. All right. So let's look at one more. Let's look at the key of C sharp. Okay. So C sharp is here. And let's go ahead and erase these alternate labels so we can start fresh here. Okay. So we're starting with C sharp, which is here. Okay, a whole step. 1, 2. We have to go with D sharp. Okay. Okay, let's get to another weird one here. We need a whole step. 1, 2. The answer is F, but we can't call it F because if we did, we'd be skipping E and it wouldn't be in alphabetical order. So we do the same trick again. Instead of calling it F, we call it E sharp to maintain the rules. All right. So remember, E sharp and F are the same note, just 2 different names for the same thing. So now you ask yourself, whole, whole, half. What's a half step above E sharp, knowing that E sharp is F? So a half step is either F sharp or G flat. We have to call it F sharp to maintain the alphabetical order. Okay, a whole step above F sharp, 1, 2 is G sharp. Okay, now a whole step above G sharp. So we're here, 1, 2, A sharp or B flat, has to be A sharp. Okay, almost done. What's a whole step above A sharp? We're on this part now, whole step here. So 1, 2, we get C. Here's another weird one. We can't use C because that would be skipping B and taking us out of alphabetical order. So we're going to do a similar trick to last time. Instead of calling this C, we're going to temporarily call it B sharp. B sharp and C are the same note, just two different names. So we put B sharp here. And there you go. It's still in alphabetical order and everything looks good. Now finish it off. Half step above B sharp. B sharp is C. What's a half step above that? Either C sharp or D flat. We choose C sharp. And there's the key of C sharp major. It's all sharps. Every single note is sharp. So that's a tough one. But the good news is that's as tough as it gets. That's one of the two hardest ones. C flat is the other hard one, which I'll let you do on your own. But it just uses the same kind of tricks, and you have to do the same things. Nothing new about it, really. So to reiterate on some of this, you need to memorize the top, be able to write that in your head and on paper at will. Remember, there's nothing between B and C, nothing between E and F. Memorize this formula. Memorize what whole steps and half steps equal as far as distance. And then the final step is you need to start building these major scales on your own. Now, there's many more than what I went over. I only did maybe 6 or 7 examples. There's more than that. So what you're going to do is in the description below the video, I'm going to put a link to a handout that I've made for you. And that it's free on my website. It'll take you right to it and you can just download it. And the handout is going to show you all of the major scale keys complete with the spelling. So you have like an answer key. Then the next page is going to be all the keys again, only this time it won't be filled out. And that way you can print it and practice filling it out yourself. Then look back to the answer key to see if you got it right. I recommend you do this over and over and over. Write it out as many times as you can stand it every day until it starts to feel easy. And this is, I keep saying music's like a language. It's also a lot like math. It kind of feels like you're doing math when you're inserting this formula over all these letters. And, the best way to, you might remember as a child memorizing your multiplication tables and things like that. It's all about writing it over and over and just memorizing it and working on it until you got it. Now, one thing I will say, a lot of people ask me, are you supposed to memorize these? Well, the answer to that is, and what I mean by that is, are you supposed to memorize the notes that are in every key? And the answer to that is no, though you probably will someday because you'll just be building these so much that you'll eventually memorize them all. But that's not necessarily your goal right now. Your goal right now is to be able to just build them quickly. I don't expect you to have them memorized yet. So just build them quickly. A good example of that is if I asked you, what is 13 times 15? I seriously doubt you have the answer memorized, but you could figure it out very quickly, I'm sure. So that's the way you need to approach these. You don't have to have them memorized, but be able to build them quickly. And you're going to do this by writing them over and over and over. And the other thing you're going to do is once you've written them enough times to where you've got a good handle on it, put away the paper and try to build them in your head. So, while you're driving to work or, when you got some downtime, you're cleaning, whatever, just ask yourself in your head, what's the G major scale? What's the F major scale? And see if you can build it in your head and get faster and faster at doing that until you can do it really quickly. So that's going to be your goal. So that'll wrap things up for now. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. You guys are awesome. Don't forget to subscribe. And my pen's dying. I guess that was good timing because we're done. But don't look forward to part 2, which will be coming soon. And please don't forget to subscribe. You will get email notifications when I put up new videos, which will help you remember. And it's also very much appreciated. And thanks so much for the support. As always, really, really appreciate it. Take care, guys. Have fun with this. This is going to translate into musical freedom for you. Guarantee it. After this, we're going to look at chord construction, how to find keys to songs, and so much more. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.